All right, George, how's it going?
Yeah, thanks, Carson, for having me on today. And yeah, I'm hoping that your channel can really sort of take off. I've only just come into contact with you recently on YouTube, and I think it's good that you're getting guests on to discuss this kind of stuff.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and I really like your channel. So anybody watching this that wants to check out more of George, in the description, you'll see a link to CARNISM Debunked is his channel. But I'm guessing almost anybody watching this knows him more than knows me. So, okay, so when I first found you, I did what most people probably do, which is sort videos by popular, and then your most popular video was vegetarianism is the opposite of veganism. Do
Hmm.
you now that was 2 years ago you made that? I wouldn't be shocked. Had you heard something like that before you made that, or did you kind of think of that on your own?
I don't want to act like I'm stealing anyone's ideas here, but I imagine many vegans have this notion anyway. Many vegans do see that,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's important to label things when you see them. And as far as I know, I might be the only activist who was first to literally say it's the opposite. I mean, loads of activists say they're nothing alike, they're not
Mm-hmm.
related in any way at all. And I think many activists do see them as opposite. But I think that video, I think just before I made that video, I was like, why don't I actually make a really strong statement here and actually make it known that these two things are just philosophically on two different wavelengths, and
Mm-hmm.
this is truly what I believe in. And yeah, I put I put that title as vegetarianism is the opposite of veganism from my own doing. I didn't like take there wasn't a phrase or anything that I've heard anywhere. I guess it's just the summarization. I think it's why it's one of my popular videos. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
vegans can just relate to it, and it made a lot of people think, damn, do you know what? I've never actually thought of it that way before. It was
Mm-hmm.
always there in my mind, but I didn't think of it in that way.
Yeah. Well, I started maybe a year or so ago, because like I'm on Facebook because I'm a fossil, but I have like, I don't know, maybe 500 to 1,000 friends that are just random vegans because I just make friends with vegans.
Yeah.
And I saw about a year ago people started talking about how they would call vegetarianism worse than carnism. And so watching yours, even though it's saying the opposite, I viewed it as kind of the same message. And I wondered how many people maybe like if your video like started some kind of a movement in that direction, and therefore if you're the cause of why this bad idea exists, because it's a bad idea. And my next question, which I'm guessing by what I just heard from you, is that you still agree with it, because I was wondering if 2 years later, if you didn't agree with it anymore, but you want to leave your content up for people to see, so you do still agree with it.
I very much agree with it. And I very much think I think I know where you're going with this when you say you think it's a bad idea, but I actually think it's a good idea to make the distinction. And we can go into why that is. Um, but for me, I very strongly believe it's the opposite of veganism. And not only do I strongly believe that it's the opposite of veganism, I actually think in the majority of cases, it's helpful to say that it's the opposite of vegan. There
Mm.
might be some nuance here. There might be some parts. Maybe you will bring up these points during the discussion. There might be some points where I might give a bit of leeway and say, there might be certain occasions where it could be to our detriment to say that. But for the
Mhm.
most part, yeah, I see it as the opposite of veganism, and I actually think it's something we should start saying more often.
Okay. Well, okay, I'll throw out my first complaint and then we can just take it from there. Now, this complaint is more so a complaint for the movement and not a complaint for the statement. And that would
Mm.
be that even if your statement is right, we don't want to discourage people from caring about animals. So if somebody, I'm guessing your average person that goes vegetarian is just somebody that watches slaughterhouse video footage or saw an animal suffering and they thought, you know what? I don't want their bodies in my mouth. I don't want to consume this. I'm going to stop eating meat. And like most humans, They haven't researched anything. They're not hanging out at dairy farms seeing what happens to cows when to get the dairy. They're not seeing chicks get put into grinders because they're male. They're not seeing all these things. And so they have this good idea in mind. And with the right push, they might go vegan. And I'm guessing especially maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, most vegans probably started off vegetarian and then went vegan. So if they see this negative idea of, oh, this group hates a group that I'm part of, but I kind of viewed us as both caring about animals, that's kind of my main concern.
So I guess I would have 2 points of contention here. First is that I don't actually believe most vegetarians are how you described there. I don't know how much experience you have advocating to vegetarians on the street and on social media, but from my experience, it's actually the polar opposite of what you're saying. You actually often meet the most apathetic and worst people you'll ever meet in your life. I say about vegetarians, they're either one of two extremes. You never really meet a vegetarian who's just in the middle. They're either the easiest person to advocate to in the world, or they are the worst of the worst, like the absolute, because they think that they know it all. They act like they're doing something morally right, and then when you give them, when you're charitable to them and do exactly as you say and say, hang on, this person, you know, they've got good intentions, it often just gets thrown right back in your face. Now, one of the most common things I hear while doing street advocacy, because I'm an organizer with We the Free, we'll be on the street showing slaughterhouse footage, and every demo, someone will walk past and they'll say, oh, I don't know why they're showing me that. I'm vegetarian. And then, you know, I'll be charitable. I'll shout after them, hey, if you're vegetarian, you know, you might want to know that you're actually funding this. Did you want to come and talk to us about it? And do you know what they say every time, Carson? Nah, I'm all right. And they just walk off. So I would say that there is a misconception that most vegetarians are just, you know, their heart's in the right place and they actually care. For the most part, I actually don't think that they do. Now, let's talk about, this is my second point of contention. Let's talk about those people. Okay, their hearts really are in it for the right reasons. Great. These are the awesome people that we need to, you know, they're the low-hanging fruit. I think it's helpful to say vegetarianism is the opposite of veganism for these people, for this idea to be out there that vegetarianism is the opposite of vegan. Because what I always say is, if people didn't realize vegetarianism was bad, why the fuck would anyone go vegan, right? If people thought that vegetarianism was enough, if people thought that vegetarianism wasn't living in total opposition to veganism and funding this abuse that were happening, why would they go vegan? I wouldn't be vegan. You wouldn't be vegan. If I thought vegetarianism was good and okay, we wouldn't be having this podcast right now. We'd be both eating a Domino's pizza, right? You know, no meat on it, but still so those would be my 2 points of contention to what you've said.
Gotcha. Well, okay. So for the first part, I would say those people that are the worst, that say, oh, I don't even want to talk about it, why do you think they are vegetarian?
Okay, the thing is, there's so many reasons that can go into this. One could just be that they're grossed out by animal flesh and putting it in their mouth, but they think that it's okay. You know, I've spoken to a lot of vegetarians who are just like, yeah, I think meat is yucky, but I would never force my views on other people. And it's like, you know, and I support farmers and stuff. And I always reply, well, of course you don't have to take issue with other people eating it. Of course you support farmers. You're buying the abuse and murder that they're funding, just in other ways. Like they act like they're on our... This is another harmful thing about them. They act like they're on our team, but they're like allies of the meat eaters. Oh, don't worry, I'm with these guys, but I support your decision to do this. And it's like, mate, you're not with us. You're literally funding and supporting the very stuff they're doing. Don't act like you're one of us. Other reasons are spiritual reasons, religious reasons. I mean, look at India, for example. So one of the biggest case examples I can give of just how vegetarianism is the opposite of veganism is India is the most vegetarian country in the world, 400 million vegetarians, but it is one of the hardest countries to advocate veganism in. It is the most vegetarian country in the world, but one of the least vegan countries in the world. You're talking 1 billion people, 400 million vegetarians, but it could literally be a handful of, it's like a few thousand vegans in the whole country. And it's, you know, you talk to Indian activists on Facebook and stuff, and they're doing a great job out there, the advocacy they're doing. But my God, it's like trying to talk to a Hindu about, you know, I had this dude, Arvind, animal activist, on my podcast. And I said to him, why is it that it's so hard to talk to Indians about dairy, getting them to stop dairy? And he said, George, because that's like saying, telling Chinese people not to use chopsticks. It's part of their culture. It's just part of being Indian, basically, especially if you're Hindu, to consume dairy. So there's so many reasons. Health, environment, people might cut down for the environment. But ultimately, yeah, for the most part, it's not to do with ethics.
Yeah, no, a friend of mine that I met through my channel, who's from India, and he's part of India's vegan society. I've talked with him a few times, and he basically said the same thing, that they just look at you like you're crazy, because like if you don't put milk in your tea and milk in like everything. And so I would say that it's different when you're raised in a society that does a thing a certain way. You doing that isn't good or bad. I mean, it like the fact that they're not eating cows doesn't make those individuals good in that sense. They're just doing what they're raised to do. Good or bad would be recognizing something bad and changing that. So I would say somebody that is part of a society like you're in England, right?
Yes.
Okay. So being in England or being in the US, where lots of meat is consumed, if you say, hey, this is an animal, they feel pain, I don't want to eat them, then you're doing this good thing, whether you know the other information or not. Similar to if you go, oh, now I know about dairy, I'm going to cut that out. And now I know about this other thing, I'm going to cut that out. But then maybe you haven't done the research to find out the details of, okay, if you consume earth balance butter, it has palm oil, and the palm oil industry is destroying the habitats of the orangutans. And then if you don't have enough time to do that research, therefore you don't change on that topic, then I don't think it means anything other than we humans can focus on each thing that we're able to focus on, but hopefully we're reasonable when we hear new information and take it in. And it sounds like a lot of vegetarians maybe aren't, but maybe a lot of vegans maybe aren't, and carnists maybe aren't. I don't know. So
yeah, look, people are right. I see where you're coming from. I mean, there's a lot of indoctrination that goes on, which is why you and I were eating animals for however many years. But ultimately, some people are just open to the message and some people aren't. And this is another point I want to drive home. A lot of flesh eaters are actually closer to being vegan than a lot of vegetarians. In that, well, I mean, I'm a living example of this. I was never vegetarian. But the moment I watched Gary Yourofsky's speech, you know, I knew I was wrong. I knew I was being a hypocrite. And I dicked around for a few months, still eating sausages and steak and stuff before I decided to do it. Now, I was closer to being vegan in those 2 or 3 months I dicked around after watching Gary Yourofsky's speech. I was closer to being vegan than those vegetarians who walk past me in the street and say, nah, I'm all right. I don't want to see this. I don't care. So, you know, now I'm not saying that I was closer than a lot of vegetarians would have been, who were even more, you know, fired up than I would have been after watching that speech or whatever it is. But the point is, ultimately, we're all abusing animals until we're vegan, and you can be closer towards veganism regardless of what specific products it is that you're buying. Here's where a lot of, I think, the contention to my point that vegetarianism is the opposite of vegan comes from. I think the power of language is at play here. It's that vegetarianism. People see it as not the opposite of veganism because of what vegetarians are calling it, which is vegetarianism. They're getting distracted by the veg. If it was called animalarianism, which I think it should be called, or animalarianism, whatever, I think people would have less of a hard time agreeing with my video on this, because it is a lifestyle that revolves around animal abuse.
Yes, but I mean that's not what the act of being vegetarian is doing. The act is removing the meat. The act isn't each of the things that you do. Being a vegetarian, part of that isn't driving a car or doing jumping jacks. If you just happen to do that in your life, you do. The act of veganism is not partaking in the, making animals suffer and whatnot. And the act of vegetarianism is the act of not consuming meat. Each of these different acts have what they're removing. But I would agree with you as far as you were talking about how when you still ate flesh, you were more vegan than vegetarians, where if you took somebody that was just a full-on eats meat, dairy, eggs, all these different things, and all they did was remove dairy from their lives, and we gave them a name. I don't know what name to give those people, but let's just say we gave them a name of a movement. I would say that is a more moral movement than vegetarianism. I would just say, and then I would say veganism is more moral than whatever that one's called, because we'd have to look at how much harm is being done. And I think there's more harm in the dairy industry than there is just killing animals. Like, let's compare dairy to eggs. The biggest downside to eggs probably is the grinding up of chicks. It seems like a quick death, and they were just born a day. I don't have any ideas in my mind that giving something more life and then killing it is any better. So if you let it live a week longer, it's not better than killing it in a day. So it dies quickly. It's one of the most morbid images, but it's a quick death. Where dairy, you've made videos on it. You have the forcefully impregnating, pulling the baby away, giving it a couple days of colostrum, and then after that, the mom cries out for it while it gets pulled away. You got the killing the babies for the veal, which is a slightly different element, and it's complicated. But then you got what I think is one of the worst parts, is hooking up a machine to part of the body of this thing and pumping it. And we're not asking for its consent. We are forcing it to do this thing, and then it dies this shorter life. I think that's clearly worse than grinding up chicks in a grinder. And then I think depending on the treatment of it, it's worse than if you kill a cow really quickly where it doesn't know. So I think dairy is probably the worst industry out there. But I think any steps in the right direction is good. So even if we figured out a way to call it the opposite somehow, I still would have to say, like, if I saw somebody making a good change in their life, it's hard to say any words towards them about that being bad. The only thing that I'd want to say towards them is ideas of what to do next. And I feel like saying what you just did, you ate meat, dairy, and eggs, and now you only eat dairy and eggs and you cut meat out. I need to call you bad. And I feel weird about that.
I know exactly where you're coming from. And I think this is one of the things that I mentioned at the start of this discussion. There are some areas where I do see nuance, and I do see we have to be tactical as well, right? Even if things are true, we have to be tactical in how we do talk to people. Now, I do see where you're coming from about the idea of, applauding the small victories, taking the small victories sometimes, because I totally agree with you that there are things that are, doing something is better than doing nothing. And there are things that put you closer towards that thing. The thing is, if we take this logic, though, we can just say that meat eating is not the opposite of veganism when it is, because a meat eater might say, I'm not buying wool. So
could a vegetarian, though.
Right. But they're still both the opposite of veganism.
I see.
We ultimately, what I'm saying is, we shouldn't make like an appeal to consequences argument here. The fact that it might be harmful in some way to just say, well, you're still not doing enough and fuck you and blah, 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 you're still a shitty person. The fact that that might be a bad tactic and a bad piece of advocacy that wouldn't do anything to say that it wasn't true. The fact that they're still the opposite of vegan because they're still abusing animals in all these other ways. But I do get exactly where you're coming from. And look, there are some people where, they say to me, oh, George, I no longer buy this and I no longer buy that. And especially the ones who I know are just never going to go vegan. There's some people in my life who I just know for sure are never going to be vegan. And I take the small victories with those people because it's like, look, I'm not going to bang my head against the brick wall and say blah, 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 because this person just isn't going to go vegan. And the fact that even they've done this or said this is a huge change in their lives. But as I say, it still doesn't do anything to disprove that it would just be true. And this is where the logic leads for me, is that we would also have to concede then that meat eating is not the opposite of veganism, because a meat eater could not buy eggs or they've cut dairy out. I know meat eaters who have cut dairy out, which is good. I'm applauding the small victory in that sense, but they're still the opposite of a vegan. They're still, yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. So I have a question, but before I do that, I just want to kind of get a short answer on just making sure with the wording. When you say opposite, you just mean that veganism is a thing and that anything that's not veganism, you're calling opposite.
Yeah, I do agree with a sliding scale to some extent, but generally, if you're paying because of the whole practicable and possible thing of the vegan definition, I mean, you and I might, let me think of an example. We might have a second-hand car that has a flipping a leather gear stick in it.
Yeah, let's just say ignoring all that stuff.
Right. But generally, yeah, the point is veganism means complete abolition of the use of animals. If you support the use of animals, the exploitation, the oppression of animals in any way, you're doing something that is the opposite of veganism.
Okay.
Because, I mean, take this in any other, if it was a human justice issue we were talking about, like, let's say, okay, you have like a racist serial killer, but then you just have someone who's a racist but doesn't kill anyone, and they're quite quiet about their racism. They're still both the opposite of an anti-racist. Okay, yes, the racist serial killer is worse, and you could say the racist who's quiet and doesn't really harm anyone, they're closer towards veganism, whatever, but they're still ultimately opposite. That would be my analogy here.
Gotcha. Okay, no, that's interesting, and I might have to tackle that at a different time. But okay, so let's leave out the ideas of like some indigenous tribe that can only hunt whales. We're leaving out stuff about like vegan products and cell phones or non-vegan products, but just for personal wants, somebody is vegan except for they consume honey. Okay, so would this person now be the opposite of a vegan?
Yeah, that's a good point, because I guess there's those people who I'm saying the opposite of vegan, who are like, they're funding animal oppression in all these ways, but they're not doing one thing, and I'm saying they're the opposite of vegan. But then you have someone who is like not funding 99.9% of animal oppression, but then they're doing the one thing. I would say they're still technically the opposite of a vegan, but they're just much, 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 much closer to a vegan. But ultimately, they still haven't got the message. They still haven't got the message that bees should not be, or any kind of insect should not be enslaved for their produce, and that it belongs to them, and that humans have no right to do those things. Again, I think you can still be the opposite of vegan while being way, 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 way closer to it than 99% of people. But again, where we have to be, this is where I bring back what you were saying a moment ago about the tactical thing. I would definitely advocate to those people in a different way. If someone was fully plant-based, they don't fund any animal exploitation apart from honey, I would obviously advocate to them in a totally different way than I would the average person, because I'm just talking about honey here for me. It's like they get the message for most part of it, but there's just still this thing that for some reason they're not grasping, and they just haven't got. So it might not be helpful for me to say to them, well, you're the opposite of a vegan in that
Yeah.
case.
Well, yeah, you could basically say, oh, it's amazing what the changes you've done. And
Yeah.
just in case you wanted the information, here's information about how you're affecting bees if you do this. And then they can take with that what they want. I guess that's
Yes.
how I feel about the vegetarianism. And maybe I just, in my old age, I just am more relaxed with people and trying to take like the nicer approach where I
Mm,
maybe used to not do so. But let's okay, so we talked about a vegan and then removing a small element like honey. Well, let's take a
mm,
vegan and talk about an element that's not in there. So when most people talk about crop deaths, we have to laugh at them, right? Most crop
mm.
deaths things are ridiculous. But one that I've been focusing on is the idea of rodenticides. The because if you there's a difference between spraying something on your food to make something want to like stay away from it, and leaving out a poison that will attract an animal that reasonably can suffer way more than an insect. A rodent will eat this poison because we don't want the rodents to eat our crops, and then
Yeah.
they'll die this painful suffering death, which hopefully we'll figure out some amazing machine that will let out these sound waves that'll make for a certain radius of space. Rodents would just be too scared to go in that area, so we won't have to poison
Yeah.
them in the future. But now the idea of, if you, let's say you go to the grocery store and buy a certain food, like I think rodents actually climb trees and will destroy tree produce, so let's just say like apples. Let's say that there was a section where you could buy these apples, but you knew that these use rodenticides, and
Mm.
there's a section where there's apples that didn't, but those cost like twice as much.
Yeah.
Would you consider yourself a vegan if you didn't avoid the ones that would cause these rodents to die these painful suffering deaths?
Yeah, do you know what? This is a question that's very tough philosophically, but one thing I will say is that there are many variables here at place. One thing about this whole crop deaths thing is that we don't actually have data to show that there is more death in an area of wildland than there otherwise would be in an area of crops. It could be the case that the exact same number of mice would die otherwise via predation or whatever it is in this other area where the apples didn't have the rodenticide sprayed on them. There's a lot of variables here that you can go into.
Oh, I don't even mean sprayed on the apples. I mean, not that it matters, but just to get a better image. Like if we have a container that, like, you ever see those black boxes around
Oh yeah,
houses
yeah,
where there's a
yeah.
hole where they go in and they eat the poison and come
Yes,
out. So it's
the little
not even that
pesticide
we
thing.
it's not even that we put it on the food to make it to where it stops somebody from going to the food, but
Yeah,
we are just putting something out to encourage a death.
yeah,
So anyways, go on.
yeah. This is just one of those questions that I have no perfect answer to. All I'll say is, yeah, if you are in a supermarket and you for no sure that one product has caused animal deaths in some way and the other product has not,
Mhm.
it would not be ethical in my mind to choose the one that did cause the animal deaths. But I don't think it's so hard. As I said, there's so many variables in this whole crop death thing that it's
Mhm.
very hard to give a concrete answer to this. And unfortunately, as you know, as much as I like to think that I'm good at like debunking all these common anti-vegan arguments and stuff like that, there is just some stuff that I just don't have a perfect answer to. And I think this is just
Mhm.
one of those questions where it's like, damn, like I don't really know if I can give like a perfect answer here other than to say, please buy the ones that didn't cause the deaths. Do I know that it makes that much of a difference if you did buy the apples, as I say, because of the whole area of wild land versus area of crop field comparison with animal deaths?
Mhm.
So my answer is, I guess that's just one of the questions I don't have a particularly good or solid answer to.
Yeah. Well, so I've heard the idea before that you've just mentioned, and I think I heard it from Lifting Vegan Logic, and it's something I've never really tackled. So maybe we can discuss it here. If there was an area of land and
Mm.
we didn't take it over for growing stuff, and animals were on it, and some animals would suffer and die for various different reasons, the fact that they would die, does that justify the idea of us, if they would have died even without us there, us killing them while we are there? That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, here's the thing. I don't. Yeah, let's say we take that example. One thing's for sure, it wouldn't be as much of a rights violation as what carnism does. So carnism is specifically breeding animals into existence for the sole purpose of murdering and abusing them. Crop
Mm.
farming, while it can be a violent practice, it's not as clear that it's a right violation to use violent methods to protect foods, especially if it turns out that there's no additional harm actually being caused and those animals were just going to die horrific deaths in the wild anyway, and there's no
Mm.
actual like yeah, but I'm not saying it's good. Obviously, if George could wave a magic wand right now and we had a vegan world, you know, there would be vertical farming, there would be no pesticide use, all pesticide violent crop control methods would be banned. In this fucked up
Mhm.
world that we live in, there's just a lot of gray areas and stuff. And
Yeah.
ultimately vegans, you know, you and I, even though we're not perfect, we're ultimately doing our best to try to
Mhm.
avoid rights violations and oppression. Here's one thing I say about being vegan is when you go vegan, it doesn't mean you no longer harm animals, but it means you no longer oppress them. Um,
Mm.
that's one of the key points to remember here.
Mhm. Okay, well, let me bring up a challenge to you that I've only brought up to a couple people, and it was answered the same way both times. But let's say that you took let's say that we had a plate with slices of apples on it, and we had a plate that had like a deer that was hunted. You had a steak from a deer. Do they call it steak if it's a deer? I've never eaten deer, even back when I ate meat. But
Like a
let's say,
venison steak,
but
whatever, or
yeah, but I'm
yeah.
specifically going with hunting, just because because you just brought up the idea of the oppressing, as far as the breeding into existence. So let's just say a deer. So you have
Sure.
a piece of deer steak on a plate, and you have apples cut up on a plate. And let's say they
Mm.
had identical nutrition. If you consumed either of them, you would get the exact amount of vitamins and whatnot. And then we could know for a fact, scientifically proven, because of whatever methods, that way more suffering from rodents went into the apple than went into the deer. Which one would you eat? And would that be considered the vegan choice, even if you are choosing the meat?
Yeah, damn, you're putting me on the spot here. And I think a lot of people watching this will be kind of sat there with their fingers crossed, thinking, George, he'll know the perfect answer to this. And now I can listen to him and I'll have a great answer to this. This is another one of those just head fuck things that
Yeah.
I can't, yeah, I can't really contemplate. And I don't have, all I'll say is, the average carnist who makes such analogies, they're usually doing this. I mean, obviously, you're not doing this. You're
Yeah.
doing this for fun and for philosophical discussion. The
Mhm.
average carnist who brings this up is doing it as a kind of red herring. It's to kind of distract you from the fact that they are causing the maximum amount of abuse and oppression and stuff possible.
Mhm.
But yeah, sure, there can be these hypothetical situations where you have an animal product that caused barely any harm, and then this plant product that caused lots of harm. And it would turn out that if you bought, and you know, that I don't have a clear, I guess it depends on what your normative ethics are. If you're if you're a deontologist, I guess you'd say rights are just inviolable, and you might not consider pest control as stuff a rights violation in itself,
Mm.
whereas shooting a deer would be a rights violation. But if you're a utilitarian, you could say, look, there are areas of veganism, even as a vegan utilitarian, I can poke holes in because this maximizes well-being in this sense. And you know what? I'm not even very clear on what my own normative ethics are. As far as I'm aware, I might be a deontologist. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's someone who sort of prioritizes rights violations and strong rules and principles over stuff like the greater good and maximizing well-being and stuff like that. But I think veganism overall is a more deontic movement. And if we were to take a utilitarian approach, it's ironic because utilitarians want to maximize well-being and maximize utility. But I think there are areas where if they answered that question you just asked a moment ago, Carson, and said, well, yeah, actually, in this case, it would just be okay. It would be preferable morally to just eat the deer steak. Ultimately, utilitarian can also lead down a path where if more people have this idea, it leads people more astray from animal rights. I mean, we saw recently with Cosmic Skeptic, for example, who's a utilitarian. Did you know about what happened with him? Are you
Oh,
familiar with the
yes. He's kind of why I started the channel.
Right.
In defense of him, actually.
Right. So here's the thing. In a strange twist of irony, being a utilitarian and maximizing having a system that maximizes well-being and net utility, whatever it is, that can ultimately lead to perhaps a world where fewer people were vegan. Though a strict utilitarian would just say, well, if that was the world it led to and it maximized well-being in this case. So it all gets very messy. And this is just one of those things, I don't have a clear-cut answer to.
Yeah. And well, part of the problem is things might lead people down a bad path, and that's not good. With me, I try to imagine that I have to speak as if people will make the right choice versus being led astray. Like, the reason I think if you are a waiter at a I almost said a name of a restaurant, but you wouldn't have an Applebee's in England. If you're a waiter at a restaurant and somebody like ordered food and it was like the wrong order and they didn't want it, it got sent back and it was sitting there, and it's offered to people that work there, you can eat any food that's just like was going to be thrown in the garbage, and nobody is hungry and wanted it that night, and you're vegan, but you don't care about the health, so you don't care about the carcinogens in meat or anything, and there's a meat thing. I wouldn't consider that breaking veganism, eating that, but I would recommend people don't do it because food is addictive, and and if you've been vegan for a couple of years and then you eat that and you go, oh, it was so good, maybe I can do it once more, and then you go buy your own. So that's why I wouldn't recommend it. But as far as conversations go, I think it's good to look at what truly is moral or immoral. And so with the apple and the steak, I'll go ahead and answer it for you. It's the steak. The steak is the vegan answer, to eat the steak. Now, in my mind, in my idea of what veganism is about, because veganism isn't about being right or wrong and beating this group or anything. Like, we care about the animals. In my mind, we care most about the suffering, but we also care about their lives. And if you have two options that are the equal outcome for yourself, so you don't have to worry about health, and one causes more suffering and death than the other, the vegan thing would be to make that choice. And I think that's possibly the best argument against non-vegans is veganism can't be wrong. You can't tell me a thing that'll make it wrong, because even if the best thing for us to do is to be full carnivore, if that causes the least suffering, then that's the vegan choice. And it means we immediately got to stop eating all these plants if we're causing more suffering that way, which obviously that's not the case. And for me, I don't know if you're like me in this sense, I care more about my own well-being than I do the animals. But then after my own well-being and my family and other humans, I care about protecting animals. So I'll do what I have to do to be healthy. I just lucked out that humans seem to be designed to do very well on non-animal products. Would you sacrifice your own health for the animals, or is it just that you're doing it because we lucked out and it's healthy to be vegan?
So there's always going to be like a threshold where the average person is going to say that they're going to have to do this to get by, to survive. So it depends to what extent it would harm my health. But here's the thing. This is why this is why I'm always very suspicious of so-called ex-vegans. How
Mhm.
come whenever you see these ex-vegans online, they always say something like, oh, this didn't work for me and blah, blah, blah. And I ate a steak and I'm feeling amazing again. This is great. If you were truly vegan in your heart and you genuinely cared about the animals, why would, because this is exactly what I would do if, let's say, in some hypothetical, the health stuff failed me on a plant-based diet. Why would they not just choose the lowest sentient animals possible? Why do they?
Mhm.
Why is it always I ate a fucking cow? Like these
Yeah.
highly sentient beings with big ass fucking brains who they shoot in the
Mhm.
head and stab to death and cause huge amount of suffering. Why do they never? Why do ex-vegans never say, guys, I'm feeling awful about this. This is the worst thing, but I'm no longer vegan anymore. I'm eating mussels and oysters, and I occasionally eat like a backyard egg from my friend's garden. I'm feeling better in my
Mhm.
health. It's like fixed my health issues, but I'm obviously feeling a bit guilty and shitty about it.
Mhm.
Ex-vegans always go down this route of I'm feeling amazing again, and I've never felt better in my life, and I have no guilt, and I'm eating steak, and it's just like this is why I'm suspicious of these people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, ultimately, if it were to ever, I am vegan for the animals, not for my health. But if say in some strange hypothetical, it came to that I needed to eat animal products again, well, yeah, I would just choose like the lowest sentient animals possible.
Yeah, for what you need. Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Which I found out recently because I've never touched the brainless animals that I hear talked about a lot recently, like clams, or what's the scallops might be the main one I hear about.
Yeah.
And I guess they're like full of B12. I don't know if
Mm.
they have vitamin D because a lot of things in the ocean do. Um, but I don't think when I used to eat meat and I have had like clams and mussels like once, I thought it was disgusting.
Mm.
But yeah, I don't know if it turns out that scallops are a better form of B12 than like a cyanocobalamin supplement. Um, I'd probably eat that. But what about you? Have you ever touched the brainless ones?
So yeah, before I was vegan, I did used to eat, oh fucking hell, I ate every animal going. I was eating mussels, oysters, scallops, and all that. But I think a much more so aside, if say we were to just throw ethics out the window and we're purely talking from a health standpoint, I absolutely think um a B12 supplement and a pollutant-free omega-3 supplement from farmed algae is the best thing you can do for your health. Sea animals
Mm-hmm.
are I don't consider healthy to eat at all. They're loaded with shit and PCBs and mercury and dioxins, pollutants. So to all the people out there who want to eat sea animals for these whatever these nutritional properties are that
Mm-hmm.
supplements already have or that you can get on a plant-based diet anyway, don't. What on earth are you doing? Not only are you causing a
Mm-hmm.
huge amount of suffering by funding like the fishing industry and stuff, but you're damaging your own health in the process for these nutrients you can get pollutant free, clean. Like, and I've got a great like a omega-3 supplement
Mm-hmm.
in my house right now. It has DHA and EPA, pollutant
Yeah.
free, grown in algae, grown in crystal clear water in a tank.
Yeah.
Beautiful. It's just what you need.
No, I have the same thing, and it's kind of great.
Yeah.
It's funny when people ask like what it's from, and you point out it's from the algae that the fish eat, and that's why the fish have it. Like you just get
Mm,
it from the source. And yeah,
right.
so I do that, and I do a B12, and then I also do a vitamin D. Do you do vitamin D supplement?
Yes. So I don't know if you've got it here in the state you've got it in the States, but I ordered the Vegan Society's official vegan supplement, the Veg one. That has D in it, has B12. It's got a few other things in it like iodine, which is good because like for iodine you need to eat stuff like seaweed and stuff, which I don't really eat
Mm-hmm.
unless I'm eating like sushi or something like vegan sushi, obviously. But yeah, that's a really good supplement to anyone who's listening from the UK. The Veg One Vegan Society official supplement.
Okay. Yeah, I just wrote that down. I'm gonna look into ordering that,
Yeah,
or at least look into it. Because yeah, I do so B12, D3, and the omega-3s from the algae, like you're talking about. And
yeah.
aside from that, I get dulse seaweed for iodine. I get the little, like, it's kind of
Oh yeah.
broken up into flakes. It's
Yes.
disgusting. I hate it, but I want to get iodine, and I stay away from salt as much as possible. So there's iodized salt. But anyways, I'll just take a little pinch of this seaweed, put it in a
Mm.
cup, add a little water, and then just chug it, and then keep chugging water until that taste is gone. But I
Well,
like
you
I like to be healthy, so.
add it to your cooking, especially if you're making a paella or something, and it's beautiful. I know
Mm.
you don't like it, the taste of it on its own, that weird kind of fishy taste. But if
Mm-hmm.
you're making something like a traditional seaside dish where you've got all those other flavors going in, like the lemon and the garlic and the onions and the
Mm-hmm.
peppers and stuff, it's great to add some of those sea vegetables to paella. I think I got it for Christmas one year. Someone brought me like this sort of sea vegetable set, like these tiny little glass bottles. There was like
Mm-hmm.
dulse, laver, or whatever it's called, kelp, and
Mm-hmm.
then yeah, that kind of stuff. And you just sprinkle it in a paella, and it gives it that lovely little taste of the sea.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. I don't know if I'll ever eat any of those slimy things, especially because what you mentioned with the mercury and all that.
Mm.
I definitely have to look into it further. There's another thing that I had heard recently that you know what? I was gonna respond to what you said about the ex-vegans. Yeah, there's something's up. Like I think a lot of it is because they're influencers, they make money, they might see, hey, if
Yeah.
I hop to this topic, I can do that. Um, a lot of them are probably doing that. Somebody like John Venus, I really don't get it, because if you're that well known for being vegan, it's not just that you're well known, you went vegan and then you go back, you'll still have all the followers. But if
Yeah.
John Venus was just, I can't believe he even kept followers at all. Or, I mean, maybe there's a huge market for people that hate vegans so much that if somebody goes ex-vegan, they'll follow them.
You're
Um,
right.
but to do videos to show like eating these animals, I'm guessing a lot of them, it's probably something to do with being an influencer. Now, Alex, I think, is different. I think Alex, I would have to guess, just from seeing how passionate he was, not just about veganism, but just ethics in general in all of his conversations. My guess is whatever amount of animals he eats now is small. I think he truly is. Part of it might be convenience, like a lot of us have to use convenience to not care about the rodenticides and some stuff like that, or just our inability to do anything. But part of it's convenience, and part of it might be health. But I am guessing that Alex isn't out there eating cows and lambs and all this stuff. I think he's probably eating a couple fish a week, maybe an egg or two. I don't know, but he's at least not making videos of himself eating steaks. And if you're going to eat an animal out of the main ones that humans eat, like, so not counting the muscles and all that, which is probably the main route to go, I would say it. I'd, at this point, without knowing more information, I'd say fish is probably the route to go, especially because I learned something recently. I'm not going to eat fish, but I recently learned that fish, th- they don't have the element that humans and other animals have in their brain that is makes us feel the pain. So I think they are able to feel pain, or at least they're able to imitate what feeling pain feels like. But knowing that information now about their brain and how they likely suffer less than, say, a cow or lamb or deer or whatever, I guess I'd be less upset with somebody if they were a pescatarian or a vegan pescatarian, whatever it's called.
The science seems to be changing on that. There's a
Mm,
podcast by Humane Hancock where he has like a marine biologist on, and
mm,
unfortunately, this guy would go against pretty much everything that you've just said there about the fish brain, and say actually they are very much capable of suffering, and they have complex nervous systems, and they might experience pain in a way that scientists, because there's a lot of propaganda that's been put out over the years by the fishing industry and stuff to talk about how fish don't have, anywhere near the sentience of land animals and have that brain structure and stuff. But a few marine biologists are coming out and saying no, and the science is actually showing now more and more that fish are probably more intelligent and feeling than we ever thought they were before. There was an experiment done, I think it was about maybe 10, 15 years ago, to see to what extent fishing hurts fish, where it was quite a cruel experiment, but the researchers, they actually injected the fish's lips with bee venom. And what they found is that the fish all swam to the bottom of the tank and they started rubbing their lips against the bottom of the tank. So a really sad and horrific experiment that showed, damn, they're feeling it when this hook is in their mouth, you know. And if you look at the pictures and the videos of commercial fishing, the suffering is insane, because I think the main form of murder that they use for these sea animals now is open air suffocation, because it's simply not possible to I mean, how many is it? Like 2 trillion a year or something like that they kill. Like, you look at the decks of these boats and you don't even see a space on the boat. You don't see a bit of metal on the deck. It's just mounds and mounds and mounds of flapping bodies from these nets that are the size of 4 jumbo jets or whatever they are, just full to the brim. And I don't know to what extent they are feeling it, but I'm very sure that they are feeling it somewhat. And there are marine biologists who are vegan who, because of what they've seen, who will say this. But I'll recommend that podcast to you and your audience. I think it was a guy on Humane Hancock's. It was either his podcast or just a YouTube video he did with him.
Gotcha. I made a note of it, and if I find it, I'll put it in the description as well.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. It's definitely sad, like seeing a fish on a hook. I mean, what you're describing sounds even worse, to see so many flopping around, but seeing them on a hook and out of the water and they're flopping around. Like, I don't know if you do this, but when I walk outside and it's a rainy day and there's worms all over the cement, it just makes me so sad, like seeing them crawl around trying to find dirt. I'll pick up as many as I can and put them in dirt. And I think I've heard recently that they don't feel either. But I can't help it because I'm witnessing they at least have a job they want to do, and I want them to get to their job. So the fish, at best case scenario, the fish are flopping around because they're designed to be in water and they're not in water anymore. So they flop until their death and don't feel pain, or they feel pain. And so hopefully it's the not feel pain. Now, if they did not feel pain, like whatsoever, if we found out that anything we could describe as pain does not exist in a fish, would you think that because it exists in the ocean and is doing its thing, whatever it happens to be doing, that it shouldn't be killed? Or would you say if it doesn't feel pain, who cares?
Well, here's the thing. I don't think veganism should be dogmatic. I think we need to take into account sentience and ability to suffer. I do think there are sentience hierarchies. And this is why I said, let's forget the fish thing. I think you've jumped the gun there by saying, if someone were to eat one of the animals, it should be fish. Why not just those ones that we are so unsure of sentience and that we're quite sure that they don't feel pain, at least not comparable to any other animal would be, with the mollusks and the oysters and the clams and whatever. Right, exactly.
Yes, no, those should definitely be first. I just meant out of everything that we view as sentient or that we view as like a typical animal to eat.
I see. But yeah, say it could be proven outright that there was a species of animal that couldn't suffer at all. Let me just steel man your question here. What level of sentience would they have? Would they value their life in any way, or are they just like these swimming vegetables?
Yeah, that's what I don't know. I don't even know to what level animals value their lives now, any animals. So yeah, I don't think we could detect it with fish, but if we look at something that we could watch, imagine imagine an animal like a dog. Like I don't know the exact numbers, but something like when a mom gives birth to a bunch of puppies, it's like crazy attached to them. Like it's got the instincts to keep them alive for a while. But then after about 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, it wants nothing to do with them and it has no connection to them. Nothing against dogs. It's just an interesting thing. And so outside of animals having connections with their offspring and having a natural instinct to take care of them, I don't know if any animal thinks, oh, tomorrow I can't wait to hang out with my dog friend, or a cow thinks, oh, tomorrow my favorite cow in the pasture, I'm going to go up to him and we're going to like rub our backs up against each other. Which is why my focus is kind of on suffering, because I don't know to what degree they think of anything.
Okay, I actually do think that animals have a concept of future, and I actually think they have a way more rational one than a lot of humans do, actually. This is proven by wild animals will actually only tend to breed when there is like a significant supply of resources around. Humans will just kind of breed without thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
But animals are actually much more conscious about, am I bringing a baby into the right kind of environment? They might, look at birds, they migrate. I mean, it's crazy. They migrate in the winter and stuff. So we can actually be sure that animals are rational thinking beings. And I think we have evidence to say they have a concept of future. As for them valuing their lives, it might not be exactly to the level that a lot of humans do, but I certainly think the most sentient animals do highly value their lives. And I think the fact that we value our lives, I don't think that's because we're human. I think that's because we're animals. I think it's because we're survival machines. And like pigs, cows, rats, chickens, it's encoded in our DNA to want to stay alive at all costs. I mean, look, if you were to hold a chicken over the edge of a cliff, the chicken would start flapping like crazy, right? They don't want to. They do. I do believe that animals are pretty much as complex as us when it comes to those sort of things. They might not have our level of sentience and intelligence, but definitely when it comes to death and stuff, they are shit scared of being killed.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what makes me wonder how much of it has to do with instinct versus something else. I don't know if all animals, including humans, have a natural instinct to want to live. And then also humans happen to have this ability to rationalize and to do some things different from other animals. Not that all of them do, but like, I don't know if when I love music. Music's one of my favorite things. I know one of the saddest parts about me dying someday is that I won't get to have heard everything. So like I want to be here tomorrow to listen to another album I haven't listened to. But I don't know. I don't think that has anything to do with a natural instinct of like, if I saw harm coming towards me, I'll have like just an action to that, to not want to be harmed. It's actually me thinking about the future and something I want. That doesn't make me any better than other animals. But also it might even be an excuse. It might be like that's part of my brain's defense mechanism to stay alive. I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think some part of fearing death is like a rational thing about missing out on this, but I think a lot of it, I think the main part of it is probably just animalistic instinct, especially if you just believe, like I do, that that's it. When we die, that's it. What are your beliefs about what happened when we die?
Oh, I don't have any thoughts on it. I'm atheist, agnostic.
Right. So here's the thing. Both you and I could probably acknowledge that when we're dead, things might actually be better in many ways. We can no longer suffer, but we still want to stay alive. Like if we're on a plane and it's going down, we're still going to be like that on our in our seats. But technically, like non-existence isn't bad, harmful in any way. It's not horrible to not exist. It's in many ways, it's actually fucking great. You're missing out on a lot of like, I mean, look back at like medieval periods in history and stuff, and no one ever thinks, damn, I'm really gutted that I missed out on living in the 1100s when people were having their tongues cut out for saying blasphemous things about God and whatever, and being thrown off turrets and whatever it is. We're actually glad we missed those things. And actually, if we think about it rationally, it was good that anyone died during that period because they missed out on all that shit. But those people, because they're animals, they've got those animalistic instincts. They still, for some animalistic, absurd reason, wanted to stay alive, and that's just because of evolution. It's just we're survival machines, and we're programmed to want to irrationally actually stay alive. But there are those rational things that you mentioned that it's like you'd also admit. For me, the thing that you have the thing with music, and it's like, damn, I won't get to hear every musical piece. For me, the thing I would miss out on would be, I want to know the answer to like mysteries and stuff. I want this might sound a bit weird to anyone in your audience, but I want to know like who was it who took like Madeleine McCann, or what really happened on 9/11, or what was the answer to this murder mystery that was unsolved. And a lot of these things get solved down the years, and it's like, shit, I might not be alive to know what happened. So that's my equivalent to yours.
No, it's very interesting. Any animal in history that didn't have this this instinct to live died out, and so that's why the ones that are here because they have that instinct.
Right.
So yeah, that is pretty interesting. I had another thought as well, and it definitely just left me. Yeah. What was that thought? I was definitely going to say something.
It was about death or something morbid. Survival instincts.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but yeah. Well, I guess I am curious. How much do you view veganism as being about suffering versus about the life itself?
Good question. I think it's a bit of a combination, to be honest. I don't take a super hardline stance either way. I think veganism is about not seeing animals as objects and resources. So from that stance, I have like a I guess it's not to do so much with suffering. But at the same time, I'd be lying to myself if I was, I was doing it for reasons totally unrelated to suffering. Because look, when I see this slaughterhouse footage and whatever it is, I know the horrendous amount of suffering that's going on, and I don't want to be part of that. So even though I think if you're talking about the strict definitions of veganism as coined by Watson and Cross and all that in the 40s, predominantly Leslie Cross, I believe, if you're talking about the way that the philosophy was coined, it's more about just not seeing animals as resources and as objects for us to commodify. But suffering, of course, absolutely plays a huge part in it, and I think it's very, very important to not play a part in these things because of the horrific suffering that goes on. I value suffering a lot. I think it's one of the main. Yeah, I guess you could call me like maybe a negative deontologist in that regard. Is that the term for it? I don't even know all these philosophical terms, but yeah, I value it a lot.
Yeah, well, so I was talking about the chicks in the grinder earlier. Like, the chicks are born, they save the girls, the boys just go down a conveyor belt in the grinder. Would you say that it would be better to let those chicks live exactly 7 days longer and then do the exact same death, or does that 7 days matter?
Yeah, I don't see any real value in letting them live 7 days longer. If they're going to be brutally minced up in a macerator, and you're saying, George, would you rather they're just murdered on their first day of hatching or 7 days later? I don't see the point in those 7 days of life. They shouldn't have been bred to begin with. Because, we see it, in these campaigns, we always say stuff, to make it just to show how horrific it is that we're doing this to these little baby animals. Chicks are shredded alive on their first day of hatching, whatever. But technically, the atrocity there is A, that they were born, and B, that they were murdered. The whole it being on the first day or the 7th day, I don't think that's actually of massive significance. I guess it just sounds sicker because it's like this is their one peep at life. Like, it's just they're hatched and then they're murdered. It's just like a
Yeah.
crazy thing that we're doing. It's like, really, is this what human society does to infant animals?
Yeah, it's weird. Well, okay, so one other question on a similar idea, but bigger scale than the 7 days. If you had one day where there was 100 chicks that were going to go down the conveyor belt and then get ground up at the end of the day, and then you had one day where it was, say, the I guess it could be toward the end of a chicken that's going to be used for meat. That they were bred to be so heavy that their legs broke underneath them. They're just sitting and suffering, and they're just going to like sit throughout that day and suffer. Now there's 100 of them, and so you got 100 going in the grinder, 100 just sitting on their broken legs suffering. If you could press a button to make one get wiped out of existence and the other one will continue on its trajectory, what button would you press?
So this is basically the trolley problem, but with a hatchery, right?
Well, the difference with the trolley is only one's going to happen, but you could switch it over to the other. With this is it's both scenarios happening, but based on like the one that's broken on its legs. Let's say it's not going to be used for meat for another week or two, and the other and the chicks are just going to go in a grinder and die. If you could make one disappear, like making the chicks disappear would be saying that you want to like save them from their life being taken and not deal with this thing of their life's gone, but not in the gross way. But then because of doing that, these other ones have to suffer. Or if you value the suffering more, then you'd say, oh, these chicks are just going to go through the grinder and die really quick and not suffer. These are dying, or these are suffering every second of the day because their body is suffering.
Yeah, I value suffering a lot. So in this horrible scenario that I don't even like to think about, and I obviously wouldn't happen. Yeah, right. I would click my fingers and choose that the chickens who are suffering every second didn't exist, and those chicks were the ones like sacrificed whatever for that second in the grind or whatever. But yeah, I guess I do place a lot of value on suffering, but I do think that veganism in itself is not so much about these questions. I mean, because it's an abolitionist movement in any case. We're not like a welfarist movement that's trying to like change the way that animals are abused and murdered. We simply want to abolish the industry. We want to wave that magic wand and erase all these animals from having to exist in the first place. I don't want them to even be bred, because I don't want to get into this whole logic of the larder thing that carnists use when they say, if you vegans had it your way, these animals wouldn't even exist. And it's like, well, good. They exist as a fucking slave species. Why do you want these animals to just be brought into the world to be abused? What kind of sick, twisted dystopian fiction book does that sound like?
Yeah, no, it's weird when they make that comment, like you just said, about you wouldn't even want them to exist. Like they seem to mean that and think they're saying a good thing. It's wild to me.
Here's the thing, Carson. What I always say to carnists when they say that is, you don't care about the extinction of cows and chickens and pigs. You care about the extinction of ice cream, chicken nuggets, and bacon. That's what they genuinely care about. And do you know the other huge contradiction they do is carnists keep saying that they are against these Holocaust analogies and comparing the Jews to animals and all this kind of stuff. They literally do that with that thing. Have you seen them do this? They go like, oh, you vegans, you want to basically genocide the animals by not having them exist. Oh, what historical atrocity does that sound like? Carnists literally compare animals to the Holocaust when it suits their argument. They just get hissy with us when we do it to talk about the horrific stuff that's going on. It shows how disingenuous they are.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and it's because people don't want to be bad. They don't want to feel bad. So if they think we're telling them they're bad, they have to counter it.
Right.
The reason I want to point out the reason I focus on suffering, because I'm with you. I I think that the ultimate goal would be that none of these animals get bred into existence. We don't need to eat them. Like even to the level that I don't think we should have pets. I don't think dogs and cats should be bred into existence. I think the ones that exist now should exist, be spayed and neutered, die off, and then nobody have pets. I really just don't think we should interact with animals at all, aside from watching documentaries and making documentaries. Because I think it is a cool idea to go out into nature and like film these animals so we can see it on a big screen in a cool way. But the reason I want to focus on suffering is because, like most movements, you have to start off small. Like everything's not going to change at once. When the people in the north of the US wanted to end slavery, a lot of people that weren't on board had to be convinced to be on board for ending slavery. It couldn't be like, let's end slavery and give them all the right to vote and this, that, and the other. It was, let's convince them to end slavery. And then once that goes through, over the next decade, let's convince them to give them the right to vote. Or women. I think England, it was very similar, where women couldn't own property for a while. They couldn't, if there's a divorce, they didn't have the rights of their children. They couldn't vote and all these things. And it wasn't like, give women all these things instantly because women are being oppressed. Now that would be great, but nobody would get on board. So they would find the easiest one to get. You get that one and then you go to the next. I really think no matter what we want, the whatever gets the closest to a vegan world is going to start with us picking a thing, like maybe ending fur, getting animals, especially the ones that aren't, the rest of their body isn't used, like minks, ending fur, getting everybody, even non-vegans, on board to end factory farming. And then that way we can just get all these regulations where there have to be cameras set up, similar to how police officers, I don't know if your police officers have body cams, but ours do. And you could have cameras set up to where, because this is such a devastating thing, but it's a legal thing to eat animals, to make sure they're not causing the suffering. Imagine if cameras had to be put up in every single farm, and then they were held accountable to doing the best practices possible. And then this would open up people's eyes to want more and more. And eventually, I think the world would become vegan. But I don't think it'll happen by trying to force it all at once.
Yeah, I've had this conversation many times now, and it's never really easy to come to like a conclusion about everything, because even with what you say there, while there might be many benefits in some ways, i.e. reducing suffering, like in potentially in the short run, there could be long-term impacts of doing that. I'll give one example. So there was a study, it might have been in the UK or it might have been the States, I can't remember, that showed when when eggs were like marketed purely as free range or something, their sales in this shop went up, which actually resulted in more chickens and chicks being murdered. More people were likely to buy the eggs because of the better welfare or something like that. And there is the argument that if we do create a world that's kind of too much based around welfare and ending factory farming, which isn't actually a possibility, by the way, we can't actually, for as long as people are not vegan, we actually have to have factory farming. That's another point I want to make. Factory farming has to exist. It's simply not feasible to feed the amount of people who eat the amount of animal products that they currently do eat, i.e. pretty much every day or even every week, whatever. It's simply not feasible to not have factory farming. But even if we could, let's say hypothetically we could abolish factory farming, there's the argument that in the long run that might just make people more comfortable with animal oppression. And they say, well, look, no, I don't know what vegans are on about. It's all humane now. Look, there's CCTV in every single slaughterhouse. There's no pain or suffering involved. What's the argument here, kind of thing? So the trouble is, there's arguments. This is another one of those things that I just can't give a super good argument on, other than I think we should promote a strong abolitionist message, because if you have a strong abolitionist message, people will just reduce anyway. People will be more likely to buy ethical and demand ethical improvements to industries anyway, if you just come at it straight away with a strong message.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, and I get it. That, and there's definitely not a right or wrong answer. Like I feel like the one I'm saying seems right, which is why I'm saying it.
Yeah.
But I don't think that I don't think it must be right. I definitely think that there could be a downside to it.
Mm,
It'd be interesting to press a button and see which route would get us there quicker. Um,
yeah.
yeah, I don't know what it is. I know that it's not vegans being assholes, but I don't know if it is preaching a vegan message versus a reductionist message.
Yeah,
So yeah.
it might be one of those things where it's like, I mean, this could be a false dichotomy what I'm making here, but let's just assume it is one of these things. It could be one of these things where it's like less suffering, but the animal holocaust is longer and continues
Mm,
longer, or more suffering, but then the animal holocaust ends sooner. So it's like
yeah.
it's one of these again kind of trolley problem kind of things almost, or not trolley, but you're ultimately it's almost like a catch-22. It
Mm,
might be a better way of describing it. Um,
mm,
but yeah, there's a lot of discussion, I guess, for a movement to have about that. But
yeah.
ultimately, my solution, as I say, is just promote the abolitionist message and make it a strong message against welfareism and reducitarianism, because it turns out people will just reduce and be and demand better welfare practices anyway if you go all out with
Mm.
the vegan message.
Yeah, I kind of like to do both. Like I'll explain why I'm vegan, and every once in a while I'll point out that I don't think we should even own animals, but I don't like
Yeah.
to preach that as a thing because anything that makes us look crazy is not good. And so like when I'm talking to people, I usually talk like about baby steps being good. Any little thing you do is good, but then also if they want to know my opinion, I'll state this thing. And yeah, I think as far as the future goes, what I see happening is something like if we can convince governments to give less subsidies to the factory farms, then they'll have to charge more for the meat products. Therefore, people well, and if meat products have to be taxed at a higher rate due to like carcinogens and different health effects, um, that these prices will make people just kind of consume less, and therefore there's maybe a future of cutting factory farms out or having better regulations. But overall, it might come down to super meat, lab grown meat. That
Mm.
eventually, if they can master making the perfect exact, just growing what it would be, nobody could tell a difference at all. People will eat that, and in a very short amount of time, most humans will go, what on earth did we used to do? I can't believe we were eating animals, because they don't, once they're not doing the bad thing, they can see the bad that happened, but they can't see it until they
Yeah.
stop. And they won't stop until they have an alternative that's good enough for them. So
You're right. It's weird, isn't it? That actually a lot of people would probably just admit that it was evil and bad once we had a world that didn't cater to that. But currently, the world is set up to completely cater to a carnist ideology. The world is
mhm.
completely set up to that system. And I think people just lie to themselves by saying that it's
Mhm.
ethical. I think deep down, most people realize that it's seriously fucked up what's happening right now. In
Yeah.
fact, you know, most of the conversations I have on the street is people just being honest with me now and saying, yeah, you're right, this is fucked up. They probably don't do anything about it in the vast majority of
Mhm.
cases when they walk away. But ultimately, I think now more than ever, people are coming to realize.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's changing it. Yeah, especially with how people feel, even if they don't change it. But yeah, most people just go with the flow. They do what everybody else does. They can look back at history and say, "Oh, I wouldn't have owned a slave. I wouldn't have been a Nazi."
Right.
but would they? I mean, like if you're in an area and everybody's doing this thing and you're raised to do it, if your parents did it and you were born and there were slaves around, there's a good chance a lot of them would do it. And it's only easy to see the bad thing when it doesn't happen anymore.
Yes.
And like
It's
there's a
horrible to
reason
think
that
about.
during like witch burnings back in the day that people would just accuse somebody of being a witch, and then they'd be like, okay, if you deny it, we're going to burn you anyways. And the fact that everybody did it, it means that most people are willing to do what everybody else is doing. And then there's
Yeah.
some weird wackadoodles like us that are like, we see a wrong thing happening and we're going to stop doing it.
Yeah, I hate how the human brain works like that. When something is normalized, we kind of kid ourselves. We see that. I think I can remember. It's hard to pick into like when you were a carnist, right? When you've been vegan for so long, and unlock those memories and how you thought. But I do. It's like I might have had these almost not repressed memories, but these memories that have come to the forefront recently of maybe when I was little, just knowing that animals get slaughtered, or just maybe seeing like a tiny bit of slaughterhouse footage on TV in the one incident that it might be shown a year on TV, whatever it is, and saying to myself something like, this is wrong, but then maybe I'm just wrong. In fact, I am obviously just being silly because look, everyone does it, everyone supports it, so that must mean it's okay, and I'm just the one being silly. It's like people kid themselves that it's okay when it's clearly they need to listen to that little voice that just says, no, this is wrong, this is bad.
I think it's part of that evolution we talked about, how like we evolved to not want to die. I think we've also evolved to not want to be outsiders. Anybody that was an outsider back when you had to stick with your tribe or you'd get picked off by a lion got picked off. So we kind of have this, our intuition tells us if the closest people around me feel this political way or eat this way or whatever, if I'm the first person out of my 30 closest friends and family to go, oh, I'm actually against abortion, you guys are for abortion, they'll be like, get out of here. You don't want that. So you go with the flow and you don't say the most outrageous things. And so we now, I think we have enough wealth and resources that we can like pick up our things, step aside and go, I recognize this thing is bad, and if I have to lose these friends and get these friends, then that's okay. Where back in the day, it would be like, if you did anything wrong here or there and you got kicked, if you were kicked out of your house, you would just be homeless. Where now we can do what we want to do. And so I think that's why we also see for all of human history, people were either willingly sheep being the religion they were supposed to be, or they were legally forced to do this thing. But now that we have all this freedom to sit back and go, okay, I can think this through and make my own decisions, I think we're just seeing a lot of changes. But it's I don't even judge most people that eat animals in the sense that they're born with that brain. And it sounds bad. It sounds like I'm saying I have this great brain and you have this great brain, and they don't. But we all just take things in differently, and their brain is telling them, I need to follow my tribe. It needs, I hope it changes, but yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, it's one of those almost nature versus nurture kind of things. It's like ultimately we're all products of our environment, and does free will even exist kind of thing. This could open another philosophical wormhole, but I know exactly what you mean. It's like you want to hate these people, and I do. I'm a misanthrope. I do fucking hate a lot of these people. But at the same time, am I being rational by hating them? I don't know. I mean, if there's no such thing as free will, it's not their fault, and their brain. If I was born with that exact brain and that exact body, that would be me. You know, so there are all these other weird questions that this opens. But yeah, ultimately, like you say, I guess everything that we think, evolution explains everything. Like the reason we think the way we do about anything is always some kind of evolutionary reason behind it. And that's a good point I hadn't considered before about no one wanting to be the outsider. There's actually a survival reason for that. Why? And it's weird that vegans don't have this thing that the other people had. We're the early adopters. If you look at that scale, whatever it's called, you know, do you know the scale I'm talking about? Whenever a new idea comes in, there's what's called the early adopters and the innovators on the left of the scale. And then like right on the right of the scale is the laggards, the ones who adopt an idea like the last. They're like the toughest people to speak to. Do you know the scale I'm talking about?
I don't know that now.
Let me Google this quickly, because this would be good for your audience to see. Early adopters Innovators, laggards. What's it called? The technology adoption life cycle, or the 5 types of adopters, early majority theory. It's one of these. Yeah, maybe it's called early majority theory or something like that. But it basically shows that whenever a new idea comes in, there's a few people who take up that idea, and then a slightly small percent that follow them, and then most of society is sort of somewhere in the middle when a new idea comes along. And then right at the end, you have like these people who just will not change for love or money, even when most of society changes. But yeah, and I think it's weird that vegans don't have almost this part of the brain that you mentioned about this survival mechanism and that. And I think this explains why, actually, I mean, I'm not calling all vegans weird, whatever, and a lot of carnists are weird, but I think it goes some way to explain why so many vegans are kind of weird, right? Because we were the ones who were never really scared to stand out from the crowd. We were the ones who, we weren't that bothered about being a little different, whereas most people like to be normal, and that's boring. But that's unfortunately how most people are.
Yeah, definitely. I see I took up a bunch of your time, and that might be a good spot to stop it. But yeah, that was a great conversation, man. I'd like to talk to you again in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'll share it once it's up, and good luck with your channel, and we'll definitely have another discussion on your channel again soon.
All right, sounds good. Take care.
Cheers, dude.